Calling up my mother to ask her, I knew, would be like asking her to describe how to tie shoelaces, almost impossible to articulate, buried so deep in her muscle memory. In Chinese cooking, this dish is like air, present and invisible. This is what New York Times columnist Francis Lam writes in his introduction to his recipe of Chinese stir-fried tomatoes and eggs. This is a classic weeknight Chinese dish that comes together very quickly and deliciously with very little ingredients. While tomatoes do not quite have the same ubiquity in Chinese cooking as they do in Italian, they arrived in China sometime in the late 16th or early 17th centuries, and while they were initially met with confusion, they have since established themselves into staple dishes like here.
Eggs are pretty inexpensive, and scallions are not an expensive thing. Usually, like 3 scallions for $1 or something like that. Ginger, I don't think very expensive. You need very little. You can even leave that out if you don't if you don't have it. And then tomatoes, if you don't have them in season, and then you just use canned tomatoes. Not a Chinese American dish. I know it as a Taiwanese dish because it was something that Amma used to eat before when she was little, not something that she learned in the U.S. The rice wine goes into the egg, and it's just to give an added layer of flavor. Just like when a lot of vegetables, like the pea shoots that we had, really necessary. The other day. Ketchup is for. I feel like you add that maybe when the tomatoes aren't sweet enough. Or when the other ingredients don't add enough flavor. But ketchup is just a boiled down version of tomatoes, and because here in California, I can still get, even in November, almost December, I can still get fresh tomatoes from the garden, not hothouse tomatoes or whatever, that they're actual tomatoes from the garden that are super sweet. I don't put ketchup. Mama used to make this. This was like a home-style easy meal for any time of day, but mostly for breakfast. Or I guess it depended on the season probably too. I'ma probably use fresh tomatoes too. Yeah, I was surprised to see it in the New York Times because it's a very home-style dish, not something like a restaurant dish. I hadn't really made it, but Amma and Akong's, caregiver, or Amma's caregiver, Shaho, who is Chinese, she had made some version of this when I visited them before. I always liked it. Cornstarch is to thicken the tomatoes a little bit so that so that it's more saucy than liquidy. So that's very common, very, very common, and particularly Chinese food, I think, and Taiwanese food, that just to put a little bit of cornstarch in things to make a sauce. This is like a comfort food. It's very simple. I can really be eating, it's breakfast food, but I feel like this is a solid enough thing that you can even have it for lunch or dinner. Maybe with something else, but yeah, it's very simple and it's healthy. And for me, it reminds me of the food that I ate growing up.